Mental Maps is brought to you by Well. Well is a virtual holistic mental health service providing psychiatric evaluations, holistic interventions, and when needed, medication management. For more information, check out Well at www.arukawell.co. That's www.arukawell.co. Welcome back to Mental Maps. As always, I hope this finds you well, no matter what season of life you're in. Today, I'm honored to have with me Dr. Jin Lee. Dr. Jin, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Josh. It's so nice to see you today.
I'm so excited to have you when your team reached out. I was kind of looking through all your work, and man, I think the first question I have to ask, and I think this gives a great introduction for you, is how does an electrical engineer get into the world of neurology and neurosurgery and mental health and all the things that come with that?
Well, it's nothing like wanting to solve a problem that motivates you. So I was a happy electrical engineer just doing my studies, but then my grandmother, around the time I finished my PhD, had a stroke. And that
Mm,
was my first entry point into, oh, this is what brain disorders are like. And she unfortunately passed away after 12 years of being bedbound.
mm,
And during the time when she was ill, that's when I first understood that brain disorders are very serious problems and we need to solve it. And what can I do was what I wanted to figure out since
mm,
there seemed to be very little that anybody can do for her. So,
mm.
as an electrical engineer, when I first learned about the fact that the brain is a circuit, I was like, whoa, I know circuits. Let's see what I can do. That's how it all started.
How cool. So you take this world of engineering and circuitry and you look at the brain and it's like, well, this makes sense, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
tell us about like, on the most basic level, how does that make sense? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so basically a circuit is an interconnected node system that functions together. And as an electrical engineer, what I learned is how to design them, how to test them, and understand its functionality. And so when my grandmother was bedbound with a stroke, like in 1 second you're fine, and then the next second you're bedbound, and the system is malfunctioning. Why can't you analyze which part of the brain is dysfunctional how and just fix it like we fix
Mm,
electronic circuits? And so I wanted to understand how to figure out what's wrong with the system instead of just doing rehabilitation therapy.
yeah. And so how did you figure, and so what did you figure out? What did your journey give you?
So the beginning of the journey was, okay, we need to understand how the brain functions. So in her case, half of her body was disabled. And what is the system that controls the motor system, for example? How does the brain control the motor system? How does the brain control memory? There are all these functions that the brain has, and how am I going to start trying to understand it? In engineering, one of the most basic approaches is you give systems inputs and then you measure its output to figure
Mhm.
out how it functions. That's one of the most
Mm,
basic ways that the engineering systems are analyzed.
mm,
And so then I looked into, okay, what are the inputs that I can provide the brain to understand the different brain functionality? And so that's when I started putting together some genetic tools with imaging
mm,
tools. And so we first started by developing new imaging technology. And then once we had this powerful input output measurements, I was very surprised. We're like, wow, I can see how the brain signal propagates. And so we started describing them, quantifying them. Afterwards, once we had enough data, we could model the brain. And so, oh, the modeling shows how when you're doing the motor system control, there is this pathway it follows. Then we could quantify, visualize, model it. That means you understand how it works. You can
mhm.
also design therapeutics. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey, but now we're getting to a stage where we really understand a lot about how the brain system functions.
Yeah, and I think, what's the work you're doing and just, what you're talking about is that, so many times in the world of mental health, but we call it mental health, but it's brain health, right? And so sometimes it's
Yes,
more
absolutely.
neuro stuff, sometimes it's more psyche stuff, but at the end of the day, it's your brain is unwell. And so when the brain becomes unwell, there is to a point, the input output is so interesting. I think, we think about it like what we're putting in maybe outside of our bodies, but it's also what's coding going on and what that looks like and how that's all
Absolutely.
broken down in that. And I think to a point, maybe we've been in that place in mental health, many, many years ago when you think of like ECT and some of that stuff. But then quickly we kind of shifted gears, and moved into the world of, pharmaceuticals and all those kind of things. So how do you get from the neuro stroke, that concept, when you think of like true neurology, into this world of like mental health and trying to find a way to use the technology you've been working with to figure out this input output for that?
So that's a great question. So my entry into the brain health world was through my grandmother's stroke. But the approach that I took to understand how all the brain health or disorders work is by trying to understand how normally the brain should function.
Mhm.
And so that is what we basically worked on understanding for the past decade and a half. And
Wow.
so during that time, we figured out the normal functionality. Basically, our approach is this is the normal way that it should work. If somebody's brain has a little deviance from that, from here to here, it should connect at a certain strength, but instead of 10, it's 8, then you got to just boost it up to 10. Then everything should be fine. And that principle applies for, any sort of brain stimulation approaches or pharmaceuticals. Whatever we do to the brain, we have to do it in order to restore its brain function to its normal state. And so the main thesis of my work is that the goal of brain therapy is to restore the brain to its original optimal functional state. And so once you can quantify and see, our slogan is make see the invisible, because once you
Mhm.
can see things, there's no limit to what you can't do.
Mm. It's so interesting because like
Yeah,
I was a therapist before I went back to school to be a med provider, and so I always tell my patients, like in both roles, like I don't have anything where I can see your brain, right? So unless you tell me what's going on, I don't know what's happening, whereas in the other parts of healthcare, I can run an X-ray, an MRI, or I can do a CT scan, ultrasound, like I can see things, I can see what's wrong. And so what I hear in that is you were able to find, and I know this can feel uncomfortable for a lot of people, but like a normalization of brain health, right? There is a normal baseline where people kind of live at for what we would call like a healthy brain. And so you're saying then when things are off, you can notice that. And so then the treatment should be
exactly.
driven by
Mhm.
that. Is
Yeah,
that,
just
yeah.
Oh, just like, you want to maintain your weight at a certain range, right? So healthy state in every part of your body is to put it at a certain operational state.
Mhm.
And so you want to, instead of being like, oh, I'm healthy and then I'm sick, you should actually monitor how your brain health is doing and constantly try to put it in the right range where you're happy and everything's good.
So you're kind of saying that it's almost like when I think of that, I think of a lab, right? I think of pulling blood or doing something like that, and you get it back, and here's your reference range. So for you all, with the work you're doing with Elvis and the NeuroMatch and this stuff, you have like a normalization of where someone of this age range, of this demographic should be.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And so what does that look like? So let's say, you have someone who's like really struggling mental health wise. Let's say, you're talking about depression. What are some of the things that like you see neurocircuitry wise on your testing is off?
Yeah, so what you would expect is you collect brain functional data. The most basic form will be brain waves with
Hmm.
EEG. And you take the data, you analyze it for each individual. You quantify it basically, like measuring your weight or looking at your blood. Just quantify it and then see, okay, your circuitry seems to have a little bit of malfunction, less than optimal function in this particular aspect. And then you could try to intervene it with approaches like neuromodulations, or even, doing more exercise. Whatever it is that we can do
Mm,
to normalize it is all good. And so if it's really way off, then you would need more extreme measures like drugs or
mm,
neuromodulation. But if it's like slightly off, let's say, you and I have bad days, right? And so when we're having like, today I'm not feeling so hot, maybe I need to go exercise more or
mm,
sit in the sun, meditate. I think we should more actively maintain our brain health, but without being able to measure what the status of your brain health is, it's very
mm.
difficult to do. Imagine trying to maintain proper weight while you can't really, the only thing you do is look at the mirror and go, oh, my tummy looks a little bit fatter today.
Mm, yeah, yeah. How interesting. And you mentioned too brainwaves. So for the listeners who may not, be kind of accustomed to using that terminology in the world of like mental health, what is the connection with brainwaves to mental health?
Brain waves are basically the language brain uses to communicate, to
Mm,
regulate every aspect of your health, like how you move, how your mood works, and all of that. And so that's basically a parameter, the language of the brain that you want to measure to go, you might want to use nicer words here.
okay. Yeah, and I think because we on the show a lot we talk a lot about like nutrition and talk about health, different health concepts in the world of mental health. And so what I'm thinking as you're talking about this is that let's say your root cause is like you have a vitamin issue, right?
Right.
That's going to impact how neurotransmitters are made. So
Exactly.
how would that show on this scan? What would that look like? Maybe
That
just
scan will show that, oh, certain kind of waves in this part of the brain connected to that part of the brain is weakened, or maybe it's
mm,
too excited.
yeah,
Then you want to normalize it to the range that we talked
yeah,
about.
yeah,
And that is actually a very straightforward process.
yeah.
And so, like, even if you're not, whatever the root cause is and whatever the solution is, what this allows you to do is to measure its outcome, right?
Mm, yeah. And
Right
so
now,
yeah.
if you're taking vitamins to improve, maybe you feel a little better, but I'm not sure exactly what that's doing.
Mhm.
That's one aspect. Another aspect is when you can't prove that it actually is effective, it's very hard to convince people that it's effective. And
Interesting. Yeah. Have you noticed too, just within this work, that maybe
Mhm.
certain brain areas respond to certain kind of treatments, right? Like, I mean, in the world of mental health, we spend so much time talking about the prefrontal cortex and the cerebral cortex, all those kind of things. Do you notice like certain treatments are better for certain areas, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. And when you can see the network in detail, it's amazing what you can learn. Some patients where for the longest time, you never know what the reason for their symptoms are. You look at the brain network function, it's very obvious why they have such symptoms. And then
Hmm.
sometimes you can even make predictions on what kind of symptoms you'll have if your brain network is looking the way it is. And
Hmm.
so, it's behaviorally quantifying your state is very difficult.
Hmm.
But once you can directly see, let's say, like your visual part of the system is malfunctioning, or your language part has issues, or even like your motor function regulating parts, when you can directly see where the problem is, it's like magic. It's not very
Hmm.
difficult to fix it. The reason why brain health has been very difficult to maintain so far is because the brain is a black box right now, where
Hmm.
when you can't see, you can't do anything. Your analogy was really good earlier, where you mentioned what you can see, you can fix, but you can't when you can't see it. I remember when I was a student going to these clinics as part of our some class where we learn about different practices.
Hmm.
And then to the two like really big contrast was the eye clinic and the neurology clinic. So in the eye clinic, because you can directly see what the problem with the eye is with no problem, you just put it under the microscope and go, oh, this is the problem. Diagnosing to like even doing a surgery happens in tens of minutes. But in the neurology clinic, because you can't really figure out what the problem is, the doctor was having conversations with the patient for 1 hour, and that's very far from even providing any solution. Um,
Yeah.
while the problem is still being figured out for this with this 1 hour duration of conversation. And so where we need to go is make brain health be more like and maintaining your eye health or your skin health, where you can see what the problem is.
Yeah. And I think when you say that too, I just think about the people that I work with who they come in and they've been on 5, 6, 7, 20 different medications, right? And just nothing's working. And so you're looking at all the different models. Like I have a model that I work out of. I mean, I think all providers have something that they're trying to work through. And for sometimes like you hit it, right? Like you figure it out, like it's something else that's going on. And then other times you don't. And so what I'm hearing in this is that this could be one of those tools where you look at the brain, you're like, well, clearly there's an issue here on the left side of your prefrontal cortex, which kind of correlates to maybe this kind of treatment. And so why don't we like lean into this version rather than me augmenting your SSRI again with another, atypical antipsychotic?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, I got it. And so what would that look? Let's say like I
Uh-huh.
just because I'm trying to understand this too as a listener and just kind of being a part of this. Like what would that look like for someone who comes in, they
Mhm.
have this abnormality, let's say in an area that's very kind of driven for depression. We're kind of thinking like let's kind of move on the world of like anxiety, right? Let's say like you have this issue in the amygdala and all those kind of things.
Mhm.
How would you know what treatment to kinda go down? What would that give you?
That's a really good question. So how I envision things changing going forward is when the patient comes in, you will put on some electrodes and measure the brain state, and you will know exactly what's wrong. That would be the beginning of accurate
Mhm,
diagnosis.
mhm,
And then instead of saying like, I think you have anxiety, it would be where, you would have anxiety to this level because of this connection, having this level of activity. And once you have that, you will also look at your options for treatment and go, is any of these options good for this? But then there may be no such options. And in that case, what we can do is try to find a treatment that actually has an impact on these particular brain function. And there are many ways to find it. One is to directly use neuromodulation techniques to have
mhm,
that pathway be repaired.
mhm,
Or even when you're looking for drug therapy or even, just some vitamin solution, what you want to do is to see the impact of these interventions on the brain
mhm,
circuit, which you can visualize,
mhm.
and then try to match the solution with the problem. So that's why
Mm,
we call our solution NeuroMatch.
mm. Right, 'cause it's just me it's matching. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. You
And
know,
so
it
how I see it is that we would do brain health checks for all of us to kind of really see how our brain health is doing over time. If it is starting to deviate too much, then you would want to look for these solutions to match the brain to the solution that will normalize it. But then if there is no such solution for certain kinds of conditions, we would develop new therapeutics
Mhm.
to go with that.
So you kinda see this not only as a way to diagnose and treat, but then also open the door for what else you could do.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it would be a way to find new drugs or new neuromodulation
mhm,
therapy.
mhm,
Not only that, all the things that, you know, vitamins or any of the
mhm,
lifestyle, exercise, whatever you do that are not necessarily in the more medical
mhm,
realm, they have huge impact on our
mhm.
daily lives. And that's
Yeah.
something, once you can visualize that, oh, this I took and it didn't make a big difference. Okay, maybe that's not for me.
Mm,
And then I take this other thing and then go, oh, I see my brain quantitative network function improving. Then like, this is the one that works for me. And then sometimes if you can do that, that will really help you get to the healthy state you need to.
I like that. And one of the things I think we've been talking a lot about like the activity being low, right? But do you see where there is like hyper excitability in the brain as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I use the example of low, but the activity, we have a normal range of activity. And so if there it goes above or below the normal range is where you have the problem. And so you want to, if it's high, you want to suppress it. If it's low, you want to enhance it.
And do you see that that kind of correlates with symptomology, right? So let's say like I'm an
Mhm.
anxious person who is I just feel really on edge, I'm hypervigilant and kind of, is my activity more times than not like overactive? Whereas if I'm like staying
Yeah.
inside and isolating and kind of that kind of stuff, I'm more underactive, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's very strong relationships that you can very easily see. And
Hmm.
so oftentimes when you like you have a certain feeling, maybe I'm hyperactive, like depressed or whatever the symptom is, you have a vague understanding of it. But then when you directly see the network, it's like, oh, this is why exactly. Oh, I feel even my thought of how I feel can be refined when you
Hmm.
see it.
I like that. I mean, because there's this movement right now in mental health, right? Like,
Mhm.
I fly that flag. I think there's a lot of other people that fly flag. Chris Palmer from Harvard, he flies that flag of this hyper excitability and hypo excitability of the brain, right? And that maybe these disorders that we talk about, depression, anxiety, are less about like one overarching umbrella and more that the symptoms kind of tell you stuff. Like, so some people are hyper excitable in their depression, right? Like they're having these crying fits and they can't sleep and they're eating all the time. And then there's other people who they can't get out of bed and they don't eat and they, all and they sleep constantly. And so it's interesting that you can kind of even see this on the brain, maybe that your brain is either overactive or underactive rather than just being depressed.
And it's not even like the whole brain overactive, underactive. It's
Mm.
like different parts of the brain. It forms a network. And in this network, this node might be overactive, that node is underactive. And then as a result, this communication path is over communicating, and this path is under communicating. So our brain is very complex. It's not like this one whole thing that's overactive or underactive. It
Mm.
is a integrated system that does
Yeah.
very complex function. We have conversations like this. I can breathe at the same time and I can move.
Mm.
And all of that is controlled by a very complex circuitry. And so you kind of need to have a detailed understanding of which one's overactive, which one's underactive, and then you have to tune it back to normal state.
I mean, it sounds so specific. And so as a provider, I'm just like, I don't know if I've been that specific ever, like in psychiatry, right? Like you're talking like very like finite numbers. One of the things, like when you were talking, I was thinking about, do you see compensation in the brain, right? Like where one area is like, okay, we got some hyperactivity over here, so I need to kind of kick it up, and that kind of sends you off into another problem.
Yeah, I mean that compensation often happens, but when the reason for it being off is temporary and small, the compensation kind of takes care of it. But when it's very constant, it goes really out of range, and then the compensation effort creates more problems in other places, and so that's how you go downhill. But the whole point is if we can pinpoint which part needs to be in what kind of operation mode, you can consider all of them like nodes of operation. So they
Hmm.
need to be in a certain operational mode.
Hmm.
Uh, and once it goes out of balance, then it's like, I try to compensate when this guy is functioning a little bit off. I try to suppress it and then
Hmm.
uh, get it back in place. But if this is way off, I try so hard to compensate this that I go off and then the other effects propagate. So that's how you can
I
um
love that. I love that analogy. Like I like to say a lot, mental health is one of the only, probably the only disorder group where, and I say disorder, is just unwellness, where the
mhm,
symptoms of the illness actually
mhm.
make the illness worse.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what you see is that, the sadness then leads to not wanting to get out of bed, and then not getting out of bed leads to more isolation. And so it's just kind of this perpetual thing where things are getting worse and worse. And so it's almost like as the brain maybe attempts to compensate for what this is going on. In
Mhm.
the meantime, it's making things even worse. And so, if you can figure out where that root is, or that cause is, or that first neurocircuit was, maybe
Yeah.
that can be your fix.
And even for self-motivation, let's say I feel bad, sad, I don't want to get out of bed. But if I see the brain and go, oh, this is the part that's making me sad, instead of going into the negative cycle, what I could do is, oh, this looks like this part is bad, which is why I feel this way. But I took some vitamin or I got out and walked
Mhm.
for 20 minutes and then I can see it improve. When you can see your own improvements, it's also an extremely good motivation. Just like you go for
Oh, yeah.
likes on YouTube or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you're rewarded for it and you can quantify it, you can go into a positive cycle of
Mhm.
wanting to do more of it. So if you can measure your brain status, I'm like, oh, my brain is a little bit off here, but I did this and then it improved. Oh my God, I want to do more.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the money with that because humans, we all desire for that positive, feedback. And so it's why we get on scales. That's why we, compare ourselves to other people. And so what you're being able to do with that in the brain is very similar. I have to ask, we spend a lot of time talking about depression and anxiety, but when we think about stuff like this, we have to bring up some of those really serious mental health issues like schizophrenia and that entire spectrum, right? And what that looks like. Because we do know like there are certain brain areas that are very involved in this, yet our treatments continue just to miss the mark so many
Right.
times. What are you
Yeah.
seeing in this kind of work that's maybe shows some promise in that?
So the main reason why the treatments miss the mark is because you can't define the problem, right?
Mhm,
It's a black box. I think it's overactive. I think it's underactive. And then you just throw a big rock in it and go, oh, that didn't work,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so the brain, again, is a very precise integrated system. And so when you know which part is wrong, this is not limited to one kind of brain disorders. I think,
Yeah.
we have a brain. We want it to operate in this optimal range. But if the brain goes a little bit off in this direction, then it's one disease. In another direction, it's another disease. And so we have all these different categorizations, but at the end of the day, it's just, and within the category, you also see many different range of symptoms.
Hmm.
That's because you just kind of categorize it based on the behavioral symptoms that you can see, because we can only categorize based on what we can see.
Mm,
But what I see in the future is that you will actually define each individual's problem on a quantitative scale and go,
mm,
it won't be like a disorder. It's more like my brain is a little bit less tuned properly, right?
mm,
Know what? I'm gonna
mm,
just do this. Yeah, I've been eating bad for too long and it's kind of put my brain into a little bit of an off state. I'm gonna try and exercise more, eat better, or,
mm,
if it's really
mm,
off, I'll take some drugs and to try and put it back in the normal range.
mm,
And so, this basic principle behind trying to get each network nodes to operate in the right range applies to everything. So far, all of the pharma approach and even the modulation approaches have been based on very crude understanding of the system. And so it's like throwing big rocks at
mhm,
a very delicate electronic system. And it's not surprising it doesn't work, right?
mm. Yeah,
I
and I
mean,
think yeah.
heartbreaking that it doesn't work, but it's not surprising that it doesn't work. Right?
Yeah, and I think like when I was in graduate school, I'd done some research on like auditory hallucinations and how you could
Mhm.
see this overactivity in the auditory cortex. And so it was like, okay, clearly there's something going on. So sometimes you can
Yeah.
even get some effect just like putting headphones in, right? Kind of drowning out that noise. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But it does make sense that it's less about to talk in medicine terms, it's less about let's touch these D2 pathways in this one area and let's focus on circuitry because you see some people in schizophrenia who just have hear voices. Other people just see things. Other people just believe bizarre thoughts. Other people have a little bit of the psychosis, but they're really just It's just really down. That negative symptoms are quite profound. Yet this medicine that
Yeah.
we use is all similar.
Even in the D2 path, because the D2 path involves lots of different
Mm,
networks,
hmm.
can involve like dysfunction of different parts of it. That's why you see
Yeah.
all of these different symptoms. And so when you see the circuitry behave this way, it's very easy to tell how the behavior will be. And so, but on the other hand, just looking at the behavior, guessing this way is not
Yeah.
possible. And so, once we have these maps, it'll be very easy to diagnose and treat.
So
We also
is that something you all
need
are
a
working on now?
diagnostic data.
I was gonna say, is
Oh,
that something you guys are working on now where you're trying to create more maps, just like constantly mapping?
so what we have now is I mean, to apply it into medicine, one of the most important things is that it has to go through all the regulatory approvals. It has to meet all the security requirements, and there
Mm,
are many things that takes to get to the stage of delivering to the clinic. For the past decade, we've been working on that, and so now we have FDA approved products that can enter into the clinic. And so
mm,
we are doing is we have some basic tools to map the networks to do very specific diagnosis for each cases. They have to do
mm,
separate clinical trials. And so we have general brain health monitoring tools that are now available. We also have the ability to map brain networks to see how the different connectivities work. And then for precise diagnosis of each individual disease, we have epilepsy that's now fully characterized. And epilepsy is a very important one because most mental disorders and neurology disorders all have epileptic symptoms because
mm,
epilepsy is a result of brain damage. And so that was a starting point that we put in, but we're gonna be putting out other solutions by going through all the regulatory process
mm.
and what some of the things in the mental health space, more like psychiatry spaces that we're working on that we will be soon addressing is autism and addiction.
Mm. Before we jump into addiction, because I definitely want to talk about that. I also kind of think about the concept of prevention. You're talking about like being able to see like one of the big discussions in the schizophrenia, serious mental illness world has always been, can you predict if someone's going to have a psychotic break or not? And not only in this country, right? In Switzerland and Australia, I mean, all these places are currently trying to figure that out. We're doing different testing and I know that visual spatial reasoning has been something that's been talked about before, but I mean, do you see that this could also kind of lend a hand in that?
Absolutely, because, like everything that is behaviorally seen is a result of brain circuit function changes. And one of the things that I think will be most helpful is to constantly monitor the brain status. And once you monitor it, what you can see is like even small delta changes. When you don't have your brain, I call it the brain digital twin version, when you don't have it, um, you just compare your outcome to the normal range. This is the normal range. And
Mhm.
I'm within it, then I'm good. I'm outside of it, I'm not so good. But if you constantly monitor your brain health, today I was at this level, tomorrow, oh, it's a little up. The day after, it's up again. Then you can really see that, oh, this is going into this, getting out of range in this direction. That's
Mhm.
much easier to see faster than just one day going in and looking at it and go, is this normal or is this out of range? Oh, it looks okay. If you observe someone at this value at some
Mhm.
point, you go, oh, it's within normal range. But if you saw this person over time that, oh, it's been constantly going up, this person is trending in the wrong direction. And so
Mm.
then it will be a way to predict that because when you have a certain um, episodes, it's not a result of just something that happening right then and there. You accumulate problems,
Mhm.
and then that accumulation after a certain threshold leads to um, problematic, more visible situations.
Man, and you're just like I mean, I'm an idea person, so I could just sit here and talk ideas all day about this. But then it's one of those situations where like the more data you have, then you pull, someone who, maybe they begin to start having issues, or maybe they're looking to do another kind of treatment. And you're like, okay, well, this brain map or this decline is kind of looking similar to what you see in these other versions of like mental health symptoms. So how can we kind of
Absolutely.
keep this from going in that direction, right? Like what can we do from, medicine or nutrition or supplement, like whatever, right? Herbs and all peptides, all these
Everything.
things. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And
That is
so you can once this person start trending in the wrong direction, then you can try to, supplement this person's lifestyle and see if you can normalize it. And you can figure out what seems to work, what doesn't. If, especially if the person has a history of problems, then, oop, this person, we better intervene fast, and then see if we can prevent any problems.
Have you done any prediction research yet? Like kind of seen where like you're, with pretty good
Yeah.
validity you're predicting?
Yeah, we're getting really good results on all of these. And, a lot of these were conceptual ideas in my mind for a long time
Mhm.
because my research has been going on for 15 years. And then actually making the clinical solution was going on for the past 10 years. But now finally we have something we can apply to people. And then once we started looking at real life cases in detail, the predictive quality is actually much more powerful than even I imagined. And so
Ah.
I'm like, wow, really seeing is believing. And
Yeah,
seeing,
and yeah. I
uh,
just think about all the desire for prediction, and I think, like even in these other version or like, not versions really, but these other treatment modalities in mental health, right? Like we think about the movement that's happening out west in the world of psychedelics and like what that looks like and how probably the biggest challenge is like how can you ensure someone's not going to have a psychotic break and how can you ensure it? And so now you're talking like could you have these predictive models where it's like, okay, clearly we've seen this for, this is going to take years, I'm sure, of just accruing more data, but like, hey, that person's probably not a good candidate for that, which could lead that maybe an opening door for those kind of treatments or just other treatments in general to
mhm.
help say, you know what, that we can decrease the risk of this by
So
knowing what
the
your brainwaves
point
are.
is to not have to guess. You can now
Mm,
see things and go,
mm,
this person has this circuitry that's vulnerable, and this treatment leads to,
mm,
potentially intervening with this vulnerability.
yeah,
Then, this person's not a good candidate. So it works both ways. It works in a sense that I can enhance I can also evaluate the more positive effects
mhm,
to, let's say, suppress this activity using this intervention. But at the same time, this intervention might, suppress this other region's activity. But
mhm,
if certain patient's brain has this region activity low while the other region has high activity, if we
mhm,
apply this drug or this
mhm,
intervention that has suppression on both,
mhm.
then we might make problems worse on the other.
Yeah.
But, if there's another intervention that doesn't touch on this node, but, enhance, like, doesn't suppress this node, but only suppress this node, maybe less effective, but still does it, we can use that. Or, many of the chemical or nutritional approaches can be more less specific, but also things like neuromodulation can be more regionally specific, for
Mhm,
example. And so you can pick and choose. Is the regional specificity more important for this patient, or is it the molecular receptor pathway that's more, involved in this
mhm,
patient's illness? Then, depending on which specificity you're looking for to intervene,
mhm,
you can start to tune them. And so both for positive effect and then also to reduce the side effects, you can have
mm.
approaches. It's just once you can see things,
Yeah.
there's like no limit to what you can do. It's just
Yeah. It's a game
it's
changer. Yeah. I love this concept. You mentioned addiction earlier, and I'd love just to get your thoughts on that, what that looks like in this world. I do a lot of work in that space. And so I'd love to know kind of what your thoughts on that, what you're seeing.
yeah, so we are directly working on both autism and addiction solution right now, but like
Mhm,
I said, this general approach can be applied to every brain
mhm,
disorder, so I don't
mhm,
want
mhm,
to just limit it to that.
mhm,
But at the risk of repeating myself, it's generally addiction is also very clear that certain brain networks are overactivated and underactivated as a result of addiction. And so, addiction is a brain disorder in a
mhm,
sense that the brain actually went into a state that makes me constantly want to do what's bad for me, right?
mhm,
And asking for people to just restrain themselves is it's difficult. The brain is
mhm,
commanding me to do this.
mhm,
How do you expect me to fight it? But once you enter into this very difficult stage, you need help to ramp them down to a more controllable state where we're not addicted. I mean, I can't say I'm not addicted to anything. Like I'm really addicted to my cell phone. Um,
Yeah.
But, once you enter a certain addictive state, you gotta provide the brain like ways to get out of that abnormal hyperactive or hypoactive state. And then once you give that direct help by direct intervention of the brain, then you can start to get back into you managing your own health the way we
And
all.
is that more like neuromodulation techniques that you're doing in those areas? Like, what are
I
you
think
seeing?
for addiction, neuromodulation would be a very good choice. Yes.
Okay. So you're able to say like, okay, we have some overactivity right here. And so within that overactivity, let's try to modulate in this area. And so then we modulate in that area, and then you calm down whatever's kind of going on there. And over the course of treatment,
Exactly.
that kind of,
Exactly.
because I
And
know
the
that,
degree
yeah.
of overactivity and underactivity will be different for each addiction
Mhm.
patient. And so
Yeah.
you and then you provide the therapy to the degree that will just normalize it to that state. So, like, if this area of the brain is overactive by this much for a certain patient and that much for a certain patient, if I deliver too much suppression for somebody who is at this lower level of overactivity versus high, then it might do wrong things, right? And so everything is about putting it back to balance. And you need to know how much of therapy you need to deliver, where, and how to get it back to the balanced state.
Mm,
One of the biggest problems, I think, in general brain health management is that people have made these binary hypotheses. This is an overactive problem. This is a brain overactivity problem. Then I do everything to suppress it and then go, huh, how come that didn't work? Because, no system, biological system or a computer system, no system operates either, positive is good and negative is bad. It's
mm,
never like that. It has to be a certain range, right? And so
mhm,
the whole point is to bring it back to that balance. And I think the biggest problem has been the limited knowledge of what exactly you need to do to get back to that balance. And now with the visualization, it's possible. And I mean, I like to give this example where a lot of people ask me, because I spent 15 years trying to figure out how to get the map of the brain in order
mm,
to understand how it works. They're like, what's the point of understanding? I want a treatment. And I'm like, but you can't find a treatment unless you understand it.
mm.
Understanding is equivalent to treating because I think at some point I gave this analogy, although I don't know if it's appropriate. But if you have a car that stops all the time, that's a car stopping disease. Okay.
Mm,
But how do you fix a car that just stops? You can't fix it. It's like diagnosing the car saying like it stops. That's a diagnosis. It's a car stopping disease, but that's not enough to fix it. And that kind of diagnosis is what people are used to and go, diagnosis is different from treatment. That's the idea they have. But if you can say the car is stopping because the engine oil is you ran out of engine
mm,
oil, then the diagnosis is the same as treatment because you diagnosed
mm.
it as a engine oil depletion problem. Then you just have to fill the engine oil. Very simple.
Oh man. Yeah. So you're like I could just see this world where like you're diagnosing and your diagnosis is like underactivity in certain area of brain, opiate use disorder, or sadness related to hyperactivity and this, and so that then it's like, okay, then if it's hyperactivity, I need to calm that down or I need to bring that up. And so it really guides you for maybe the first time, because I mean that's such a hot topic in mental health, right? That the diagnosis needs to guide the treatment. So for the first time, it's really that this diagnosis or this word or whatever we're going to use does dictate the treatment.
Absolutely. Diagnosis is the same as treatment because
Mm.
diagnosis will come with the exact knowledge of which part of your
Yeah.
brain is, malfunctioning how.
Mm.
Then you just change that back
Yeah.
to normal.
I
So
like, yeah.
diagnosis. is the same as
Sure.
treating.
Yeah. I got 2 things because I don't want you to I wanted to ask you about these 2 concepts. I know we're getting close on time. The first has to be so I know if you've been in the mental health world for a while, for many years ago, something like neurofeedback got really popular. And so I'm sure for some people who's been in the game for a while, as they hear this, they're like, what makes this different than neurofeedback? And so for you, how would you respond to that?
This is the ultimate neurofeedback because one of the reasons why neurofeedback is good is because I think neurofeedback really builds on the concept of you want to like, get it back to this a certain stage through a closed loop, right?
Mhm.
But you can't a car, you want to that same analogy, you want to get that car back into the operating state by providing it feedback that car, you should run the car, no matter how many times you tell them to run, it may not run. So the ultimate neurofeedback has to come with precise knowledge of what's wrong. And once you can pinpoint engine oil, then you feel the oil, and that is you're giving feedback where you're filling the oil. You don't want to overfill it. You don't want it to like go all over the car and then just like soak it all in oil, right? And so you are getting a gauge of, okay, engine oil is at this level, 0. We need to put it in this range, and then you start filling it and then see, this is good. I stop. And so this is an ultimate form of neurofeedback with precise knowledge of your circuitry. Neurofeedback is interesting and works in various circumstances, but we can't really say that's fixing all brain health issues.
Yeah. Which is
And
one of the
that's
reasons why it never, really generalized. I mean, I know some practitioners who swear by it, and I mean, it's definitely it has a space in the world like performance mental health and that kind of stuff. But there's always been this desire, I think, in mental health and there's the world of psychiatry to find something that can give you some of this. And so neurofeedback initially was kind of one of them, and it has some efficacy, but it kind of fell short for a lot. And then so anything that ever come out after that, everybody was just like, I don't know. So you're kind
yeah,
of saying this is kind of
true
the
for
ultimate
not
version.
just it's not just true for neurofeedback, it's for almost everything in mental
Mhm,
health,
mhm.
is
Yeah.
taking vitamin helpful, or is neurofeedback helpful,
Mm,
is psychedelics helpful? Like
yeah.
there's everybody swearing by it, but we can't really prove it one way or another other than anecdotal examples. The reason why some people swear by it is because it probably works sometimes,
Mhm. Yeah.
but we need
Mhm.
to know which times it works,
Yeah. Right
how you
on.
apply it,
Yeah.
right? And this knowledge of the brain state lets you connect all the information where, like, for you, vitamins not going to work at all because your problem is not there, right?
Mm,
And for you, neurofeedback, not really. But for this patient, that will be sufficient. So when I say ultimate form of neurofeedback, I'm not just talking about the current form of feedback. One is the understanding of the brain has to be in a much higher precision, which is what we are starting to provide. And the feedback is, you can even consider drug feedback too. Like you're just feeding back into the knowledge of, okay, I
mm,
need to fix this problem. What feedback do I need to give? Is it nutritional change? Is it like lifestyle change? Is it drug change? So it is a form of ultimate neurofeedback where you precisely define the problem and then you fix it.
mm. It's so interesting. So I guess how then, with the work you're doing, how is this making its way into the world of like what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so the NeuroMatch solution is built as a platform that integrates all of this brain circuit information
Okay.
into a usable tool. And this tool can be utilized anywhere. And it's very easy to use where all the informations are all integrated, FDA approved for, clinical use. Then you just use it to individually understand each patient status. And then, you might come up with your own therapy, but also there will be people now using this information to come up with new therapy for new patient groups. So the way we would come up with therapy is right now you define like schizophrenia, depression, all in one group. But how I
Mhm.
envision it is that these will be subdivided. And like this kind of schizophrenia patients have this particular pathway problem. The reason why we can subcategorize it is because our system goes wrong in a certain direction. There are vulnerabilities in our system where
Mhm.
specific, like in a car, engine oil tends to leak or something like that, right? And so when you have a very specific kind of problem, then you put resources into finding a solution for that. And then in the clinic, if you see a patient with that problem, you'll give them this particular treatment.
Mhm.
And so how I
So
envision it is that we'll start doing the diagnosis in this way. And then for all the current treatments, we'll start to match them. And the holes where we don't have the proper tools, we'll start making new therapy.
so if you're a provider and you're listening to this, how could you get involved in this work, the stuff that you're doing?
Um, You could just start engaging in utilizing NeuroMatch in your practice.
Okay.
Uh, and then through that, there are, how I envision it is that you can use it, but also there could be, activities of doing more research to kind of get to the next steps that are natural progressions from this technology.
Yeah, so it's like I think, when you're on the cutting edge of something new, when you're engaging in something like this, you're part of the creation process as well. And so for every provider that jumps in or anyone who jumps in, you're finding yourself at a place where the more data that is being accrued, the more generalizabilities can be created and the more we can kind of understand things. And so I think that's really interesting that, because I know there's many providers who are kind of looking for ways to just kind of innovate. And so this is something where you can
Absolutely.
take something that's cutting edge, new, that's in this new world that we're kind of operating in as providers, but then you can still go to whatever treatment modality you feel the most comfortable with and then find a way to kind of connect it in.
Yeah, and so one of the most important ways to really transform things is that we need to now also get the word out and educate people on how these things can be done. And I'm very excited to work with anybody who's interested to take this to the next level.
That's really incredible. I've got to ask one of the things that I'm sure pop culture wise, AI is super hot topic, right? For someone who's kind of new to this world, would you consider this AI as its own thing? Like, I know there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to get involved in that." What do you think about that?
Great question. So one of the ways that we innovated in this NeuroMatch solution is by doing like deep neuroscience stuff because AI
Mhm.
can't solve every problem. So we
Right.
first needed to get the understanding of the brain. But then once we had that understanding to actually apply it into clinical data, AI was a very critical part of it because you see through noise and find patterns which
Mhm.
humans cannot go through data and find like repetitive patterns, for example.
Mhm.
We're not very good at that. There are certain things we're good at, but we're not good at that kind of tedious task. And we used AI to automate a lot of those. And once we automated it, there are patterns that you can never see with human eyes.
Mhm.
And so that's one way, like AI is really transforming the way we look at the brain data. But on the other hand, what I want to mention that's very interesting to me is I got into this field because I wanted to treat brain disorders. But we now have understanding of how the brain system functions. And the brain is like the ultimate intelligence, right?
Mhm.
Human intelligence. And the brain has a certain architecture that is very different from our current AI computer systems. And so, one of the biggest limitations of current AI, even with all of its glory, is that it has very bad energy efficiency. And the
Mhm.
brain is designed to be very energy efficient.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we think what we have learned now with the brain can really propel the next stage of AI that
Mhm.
is energy efficient. And I think energy efficiency in AI is the most important character for AI to be serving the human race.
Mhm.
Because if AI starts to compete for energy resources with humans, that's not a very good thing. Well, like if we really
Mhm.
want to make AI serve us, then it has to be where it has to have energy efficiency. And this pursuit of understanding the brain to help enhance human brain capabilities where we're free from disease is also going to help us propel AI's capability into the next stage to help
Mm.
serve the human race. And so that's generally how I see AI tie into all of this.
Man, it's so interesting. So it's one of these situations where even this model and this tool and all the things that it can do, it's utilizing that, but it's still different than that. So if people are kind of like, I don't know if I want to use AI, this is different than AI in itself, right? This is more, but I think what I keep hearing from you is just this constant integration of everything that we have at our hands. And I think one of the things that we struggle with in healthcare is we get into these like super polarizing views of different concepts, and so it's like this is the only way or this is the only way, or it's only nutrition or it's only medicine or it's only AI or it's only this. And so what you're kind of saying is this kind of just gives you a way to show what's wrong, and then from that you can integrate all the other concepts that go in it. And I think maybe for some people that can feel really uncomfortable because it is going to kind of riff on, hey, there's some other things that could also help you, and I can show you that because there's data. But I
Uh,
think there's such a need. Gosh, there's such a need for that integration in healthcare right now.
you're dead on. I think the biggest problem has been that they just argue that this is important versus that. But the reality is that they're probably both important,
Mm.
but in different circumstances. So you need to define the context of how and why this is important and how and why that's important. Like looking on the bright side, they're all they're all right. It's
Mm.
just that without proper context, they're all wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and this neuro match has that ability to say, this is why it's right for this one person or this group of people.
Exactly. Yes. And so it's a way for us to be all correct.
Hey, what about that? I think everybody gets along with that, right? What do you see, but before we kind of end, what do you see in this? I know I had like two questions now. I've got like so many more. What do you see this kind of leading in the world of performance? Because I know the world of like performance, brain health has been very rapidly growing. The world of concussions and those kind of things. I mean, there's a lot of work that like all the athletes are doing now. Steph Curry and Alvin Kamara and all those people that are kind of doing like neuro kind of stuff. What do you see kind of be a place for this neuro match in that?
That's a great question. Performance enhancement and disease treatments are like just two sides of the same problem. Where
Mm,
I'll give you one example where in our research, one of the things we found is the same brain network that once it's reduced in capability, you lose consciousness. Uh, and then once that function is further enhanced beyond a certain level, you get extreme concentration. Uh,
mm,
and so that's a good example of how it's the same problem. But does that mean we want to also go into this extreme concentration? I don't think so, because let's say you're doing a certain task that's very important at that very moment. Maybe you can temporarily enhance, but putting that function in a constantly enhanced state will also create disease because the brain is a limited resource running energy efficient system. It has to clean stuff, it has to rest, and it's balancing different activity. If you enhance one aspect of it too much for too long, it'll reduce other aspects of its functionality. And so, like I said, the brain needs to be in a balanced state, but we also all have different strength in our capabilities. So your balance and my balance for, this versus that is different, where you can see certain parts of it being enhanced to um, or performance enhancement, but taking that too far will have consequences for your brain health is what I
Yes,
think.
it's almost like not only, you know,
Yeah.
do we have to find ways to enhance our brain if we want to try to go down that route, but then also there has to be this need for rest and like what that rest looks like and how to kind of turn it back down as well.
Yeah, so an optimal thing for performance enhancement could be that, during these 2 hours, I need extreme concentration. So I'll like enhance it. But then if you do it for 2 hours, then you need to rest for 10 hours to make sure that you don't
Mm.
disrupt your other brain activity.
Which, oh my gosh, that just brings up all kinds of concepts, right? Because you think about all of us as workers in the world, we get up and we don't get, there is that the happy flow state, right? But a lot of people don't live in a flow state. They work 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day. And so then they wake up, they go home, they get 8 hours of sleep, and they wake up and they do it again the next day. And so is that enough, for you to
Yeah,
be in that hyperactive state, be able to be that good at your job? Or do you have like another version of yourself that's
right.
maybe a little bit more mediocre because you
Yeah.
can't rest as much? And so could you find that
And
happy?
this particular concept that you're laying out, this is, I think, fundamentally the basis for mental disorders, brain disorders, because if your
Mhm.
brain was pushed in a wrong direction, whether it was too much concentration for too long for your certain brain state, or was it exposure to bad nutrition for a really long time, or whatever it is, like it just puts stress on the system's balances. This is another way to look at what we've been discussing.
Yeah. And so then you think like dementia and concussions and CTE and just all the things you're seeing in the from a brain health perspective is just like extreme versions of that chronically.
Exactly, exactly. You're dead on with everything here.
Angie, I love it. Jen, thank you so much for this. This is so life-giving and it's so interesting. And I like to kind of contemplate. I'm sure my listeners also are just kind of like, oh man, so many cool ideas you can have. So for people who are listening or just want to be involved in your work or want to know more about what you're doing, how can they like follow your work? How can they, follow what you're doing?
Yeah, so there's multiple sources online. There's elviscorp.com, where you can find the latest tools that are available. We also have a YouTube channel. If you type Elvis NeuroMatch, you can find a YouTube channel where we put up some information. And so there's a news channel also on elviscorp.com, and you can find all the nice videos and articles associated with that.
Nice. And I'll make sure to connect that in the show notes as well as you have the Lee Lab, which is at Stanford University and the work you're doing there and the stuff you do on
That's
your
for more
own.
basic science if you're interested. And for actual clinical solutions, you can look up the Elvis website.
Awesome. Man, thank you so much. I always ask everybody that comes on, what is one thing you're doing for your mental health right now that you find to be very helpful to you?
I think the one thing, if everybody asks me what's the one thing, I think if we just needed to give one solution that applies to everyone, it's you should sleep well.
Oh, man, that's
Is
a hot
the
topic.
most important one. And that's also leads to, like I said, when there is brain damage, it leads to epilepsy. So almost all brain disorders involves epilepsy. At the same time, it also all involves sleep problems because once the brain has entered a certain state, the sleep, which is an active maintenance of your rest state, is also disrupted. And so it's like a negative cycle that's involved in epilepsy, and sleep, I think, is a negative axis involved in all brain conditions. And so I try to sleep well.
Mm. So it sounds like prioritize sleep, and that's going to help your brain across the board, no matter what you're going through.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Jen, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. I'll definitely connect all this stuff in the show notes. And man, thank you so much. Thank you for this work you're
Thank you,
doing.
Josh. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.